ACAN are pleased to be hosting this event, which is our 10th event on building with natural materials, and this is our 6th of our material masterclasses, and this time it's focusing on natural finishes. And we've got some really great minds from across the industry presenting tonight, followed by a panel session where the speakers will be able to answer your questions posted in the chat box. So again, feel free to post them kind of at the end or throughout the presentations, and we'll pick them up after all the presentations are finished. So I'd like to introduce Simon Corbey from the Alliance for Sustainable Building Products, which is shortened to the ASBP. Simon, give us a wave. Simon will give an intro to natural finishes, highlighting the issues of plastics, indoor air quality and VOCs. We've got Michiel from Brouns Linseed Paint. He'll follow on with solutions in terms of ingredients, specifically relating to natural oil-based products. If you want to wave when I'm introducing you, that'd be great. Moving on to clay plasters with Claire Whitney from Claywork. Hi, Claire. And we will conclude with Rachel Fowler, who talk us through the specifics of natural wallpaper. Thanks, Rachel. Before we kick off, I'm sure most of you already know about ACAN and some are involved with the network, but for the benefit of others in this room, I will give a brief introduction into who we are and what we do. So I'm going to hand over to Aurora.
For anyone new to ACAN, we are an open voluntary network of individuals in the built environment industry. So we're formed in April 2019, and it has now grown into a global network of over 3,000 people. It started with a vision for how we could work autonomously as a collective of individuals in order to make rapid decisions and respond quickly to the climate emergency. So our manifesto has 3 overarching aims: decarbonize now, ecological regeneration, and cultural transformation. So you can read a bit more detail about this here and on the ACAN website. We'll share the link later on. So ACAN is made of mini groups, including these 9 main thematic groups, of which natural materials is one. Each group is made of individuals who want to make change happen, and a couple of people from each group take a coordination role to help facilitate the group and any actions. You can hear more about what else is going on in the other groups by joining ACAN, and we'll share a link to the other groups in the chat box. Back to Steph now to introduce the speakers.
Brilliant, thank you, Aurora. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Simon Corbey from the ASBP. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So my name is Simon Corbey. I'm a chartered surveyor. It's a real pleasure to be invited here by the ACAN group. I've loved working with these guys because there's so much enthusiasm and dare I say youthfulness, which is quite refreshing for the old timers like myself. So I'm director at the Alliance for Sustainable Building Products. We're a not-for-profit mission-led membership organisation, and our mission is to accelerate the transformation to a healthy, low-carbon built environment by championing the use of demonstrably sustainable building products. So our focus is very much on the product, and we've chosen that place because that's when the transaction happens. So that's when you part with your money. That's when you make a decision as to which product you're going to buy over another. And as you can see on the right-hand side, we're an active organisation. We do loads of events, training, guidance, responding to consultations, lobbying. We've got 5 research projects on the go at the moment. And we aim to work across all of these fields at the bottom here, from health and wellbeing through to ethics and transparency. So I'm pleased to say that we've launched a new group. We call them communities of practice. And what that means is that you bring, in most cases, competitors together to collaborate. And it's quite an interesting model because people are a little bit sheepish, a little bit worried to begin with, and then relax and then start to share issues, share problems. And it's a very useful process. So we've got 4 of these on the go: natural fibre insulation, reducing plastics in construction, and reuse generally are the other 3. So with the paints and finishes group, you can see there's a couple of our speakers who are going to follow on from me. So we meet quarterly. We worked out our terms of reference. We're looking at a code of conduct. And our aims, first of all, is to look at greenwash. And so there was an estimate by the government that some 40% of environmental claims are greenwash. And one of those claims we like to think is the fact that something is 100% VOC free, because I think we'd all understand that actually there will be traces of VOCs. When I breathe out, I have several VOCs in my breath. So there will be VOCs in the product. So it's misleading saying that something's 100% VOC free. So we need to be a little bit careful about the language that we use. So traces or virtually VOC free is the way forward. And that's the type of language we need to look at. So we've done a couple of events around paints and finishes. Have a look at our website for more. So what problems can natural paints and finishes solve is an excellent one. And we had a speaker from Environmental Action from Switzerland, and this report really struck me earlier on in the year, and it looked at a global assessment of the level of plastic paint leakage worldwide. And it's just a reminder, just in case you didn't know, and actually maybe you don't think about it, but actually a large part of your average tub of emulsion is plastic. So that's why you'll tend to see it bubbling when there's moisture trapped or there's moisture in the wall, because it's plastic, it's got nowhere to go. So of course, we know that the paint needs repainting, redecorating. So where does that paint go? Well, quite often it ends up either on the land or going to ocean and waterways. And interestingly, architectural paint was deemed to be the highest causating factor there. So that was quite sobering, and is an additional reason why we should be using natural paints and finishes. They tend to have no plastic in them whatsoever. So here we can see that actually paint goes to the very top of all the other products, tires, clothing, indeed, as a contributor to microplastics in the ocean. So a huge reason to think very carefully about what you're buying and what you're specifying. So this is just one slide from presentation by Tim Robinson of Waverton Analytics, and they're indoor air quality specialists. And I lecture on indoor air quality at University College London. And these are some of the chemicals that you might find in your average water-based emulsion paint. Now, I'm not a chemist. I did chemistry O-level, and my head starts to I start to get a headache when I start to read these, because, you know, I'm not sure I can even pronounce some of them, but this is what you will find in a fairly standard pot of paint. So if we look at the top, so a total measure of VOCs before painting is 438. During painting, and then we get a massive increase, as you might expect, to 4,095. And then slightly unusually, maybe you wouldn't expect it, it carries on going up. So a day after, it's 4,918. 2 weeks after, yes, it's come down, but it's still a significant chunk of VOCs there. And after 2 months, so we've got 2 locations that these are measured, we still haven't returned back to the measurement that we took before the painting carried on. So it's just, again, another real reminder that your average can of emulsion or pot of emulsion will have an indoor air quality impact upon you and the residents in your home for some considerable months. So some reckon up to 2 years. So this is another good reason why we should be wanting to use more natural paints and finishes. Yes, some of them contain VOCs, but there are natural VOCs and there are synthetic VOCs. Not all VOCs are bad for you. Most VOCs, you know, are absolutely fine. But there are some that are very bad for you. So it's a complicated subject, and one perhaps that we could do with spending a bit more time looking at. I think we all need to increase our understanding around this area. But now's not the time, you'll be pleased to know, because we're going to go on and have talks by a range of other speakers who are going to be talking about much healthier products. So do get involved with ASBP. We've got a free monthly newsletter, just sign up. We do lots of events. We often offer ACAN folk free places or discounted places. If you want to get involved in some of our work, just get in touch. Here are our contact details here. We're a growing team, we're very friendly. and we're always pleased to hear from you. So that's me. I've tried to keep within my time limit. I've done okay there. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand back, and then I'll let Steph take over.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Simon. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great intro for setting up the scene for where we are currently with our kind of typical finishes that we use, for example, paint. And yeah, hope to open your eyes to kind of other natural solutions that we've got on board. So with that, I'm going to invite Michiel. Thank you for screen sharing, and I'll pass over to you.
Yes, well, that was it. Thanks everyone for joining, and for ACAN for hosting this event. Simon gave a perfect introduction in like generic terms as to why it is important that we need to look at natural building materials, and there are solutions. Now, I'm come more from an historic building background, where I used to survey buildings in the Netherlands. And usually it was related to problems with damp, moisture. And as we started to look at what was causing that predominantly, it turned out it was essentially modern building materials in a completely unsuitable situation. Now, as you'd be surprised, a lot of you will actually probably be aware of lime wash and lime paint and lime renders, but perhaps less acquainted with linseed paint and linseed oil. If you take anything away from this presentation, that's probably the one to remember. So if you know when to use like a limecrete floor, or you use a lime wash or lime render for your walls, historically, linseed paint was used for anything on a timber and a metal substrate, in very crude terms. We don't have the time to go into specifics now, but as an introduction into linseed paint, here we can actually, let's have a look at what it actually is. And most of you will recognize flaxseed, probably sprinkle it on your yogurt in the morning. It comes from the Linum usitatissimum plant, which is on the left, which has only just stopped flowering now. But if you ever do see a field of these nice violet flowers, that's what it is. Fortunately, we're seeing more of them, and a few lesser, a fewer of the rapeseed oil. That will be the next step. What we do is you press the flaxseed. And then you get raw linseed oil. This is cold pressed to get the best quality. You don't want it warm pressed, because then you can get a lot of impurities. And essentially, the oil that we have is food grade. So it also the farm that we get it from, which is about 20 minutes up the road from here, in Wetherby, they also supply the animal industry, and where it gets added as a feed supplement, mainly for horses. That's our basis. Now, raw linseed oil is not a great carrier for pigments, and it dries very slowly. It is classified as a drying oil, which dries by exposure to UV light and oxygen. But it has very few properties other than nourishing the oil. So what we need to do is then and again, this is a centuries old recipe and method. You boil the oil, and what happens is that changes the viscosity, and it kickstarts the polymerization or the drying of the oil. Which is what you need when you start using it in an architectural, or building setting, when you start oiling or painting something. Now, historically, what they did, they used to add predominantly lead to increase the drying. We definitely don't want to be using that. So now it's a very small quantity of what is at the moment the kindest drying agent, which is a calcium. It's a new generation of calcium dryers. And you can see the quantity of it is 0.15% by weight. So you're talking drops. Now, then how do we actually turn that into an oil or a paint? And you can see on the left here, just in the background, you can see a triple roller mill, So what happens is first you take the oil, you add the powder pigments. We would try and use raw earth pigments or natural occurring metal pigments wherever possible. So raw earth, you have to think about a yellow ochre, or we can have like a carbon black, or some metal pigments might be zinc white, titanium white. Now they get mixed into the oil first by a stirring mixer, but then it needs to pass through the triple roller mill between 2 and 5 times, depending on the grain size of the pigment. And what you're then left with is what you can see in this big tub here is a paste. Once we have that paste, you can then decide whether you're going to use that for to create a paint range, or by just adding a bit more boiled linseed oil, which is the main ingredient anyway, or you can keep diluting it further and turning it into oils for interiors. So we also have a range that is a floor oil, or an oil for furniture. Now, for a floor oil and a furniture oil, you want the drying to be a lot quicker than for a paint, because it gets used indoors, so it gets far less exposure to UV light, which is one of the main drying components. So we do add some dryers there, but again, you're looking at less than 3 grams per liter. So compared to the slide that you might remember from Simon with the VOC content, this doesn't even register on that scale. Just to give you a bit of a sense of proportion there. Now, as I said, this is when we talk about the boiling of the oil, a centuries-old method and technique. It has been around for absolute centuries. And I've been commissioned to write a book on it, which is exciting. So I've done a lot of academic research into it as well over the last couple of years. And there is so much historic evidence of it being used. But then what happens is essentially the Second World War happens, and you have this enormous waste mountain of plastics, acrylics, latexes if you're in the US, and they are essentially a waste product of the war effort. So these refineries are stuck with these enormous mountains of acrylics and latexes, plastics, and this corresponds at the same time with a drive for modernism at its almost at its worst. All of a sudden, this corresponds with an enormous increase in the use of concrete, steel, large glass expanses, and linseed paint pretty much disappears overnight. Now, I have dropped another point in there called lead, just avoid a bit of confusion, which is something I come across very often, where people think that the historic paint was always a lead paint. That is not true. It was essentially a linseed paint with lead white or lead red as added as a pigment. It was very effective. Obviously, we don't want to use that anymore, but anything painted prior to the 1950s, 60s might very well have had lead content. So if you're removing lead, old paint from a building in your house, make sure to test it for lead as well. So you can use the right precautions. Then fast forward to the 1980s, 1990s, and all of a sudden, mainly on the continent, you can see all these old buildings that have been absolutely fine for hundreds of years, for centuries, starting to fail. So the timber starts to rot, the stone structures start to seriously deteriorate, and they all have these things in common, that they've all been painted with film-forming plastic products or insulation materials or membranes, or it could be any kind of form of plastic that kind of traps moisture in. So what we say is, why should we use it now if that's not good enough reason on its own? The main point here is that top point again, that's the most technical part of it, but the surface tension of linseed oil and of the paint is lower than water. Now what that means, it penetrates into the substrate deeper than water will ever get to. So the water kind of just beads off on the surface, but it acts, linseed paint almost acts like a bit like Gore-Tex. It's probably the best analogy. So it won't let moisture in through the surface, but any moisture that gets in behind the paint can wick out through to the surface. And those excellent wicking properties means that that timber stays dry. And if timber stays dry, it doesn't rot, right? This is a lot of, all these things are, none of these things are rocket science. They're pretty straightforward, but I've yet to see a dry timber that rots. It doesn't really want to do that. So that's the historic element, and also saving existing timbers in historic buildings. You'll never get the same kind of quality timber back. Very easy to maintain, because what happens is that the oil on the surface starts to evaporate or dry out by exposure to sunlight, to UV light, and you're just left with a powder pigments. So when that happens, all you need to do is wipe a bit of boiled or raw linseed oil over the surface to give it a bit more of a sheen level again, if you don't like the matte finish that it turns into. And by doing that, you have an exceptionally long lifespan. You don't really need to repaint. So if you stay on top of that oiling, and that can be anywhere between 1 and 3 years, depending on the elevation, north facing, south facing, wherever you are in the world in terms of exposure to the elements. Now, if you were to completely neglect it, you probably have to repaint once every 10 to 15 years. But even then, you don't have to strip all the old paint off. There's no bubbling, there's no peeling. It just goes chalky matte. So then you just put one coat of fresh paint on and you're finished. So you reduce the maintenance, the embodied energy of getting this whole crew of contractors back on site and carry out that whole work. Can be used on pretty much any substrate, sticks to pretty much anything, but certainly it's far more effective on timber and on metal. And then the last point is, and this is certainly not a greenwashing exercise, it is very green and it is very healthy. And to just briefly touch on that, because I know that I'm probably starting to run out of time here. So how green is linseed paint? Well, we've seen the ingredients. You've got linseed oil and pigments, which is by far the biggest component of the paint. We don't use refineries or any kind of heavy industry to produce it. Right? The oil comes from a local farm. We boil the product ourselves. The grinding gets done 10 minutes up the road. So we have very low product miles, which is something that I'm very interested in doing. So we want to keep everything very local. Of course, there are packing materials involved and there is shipping involved. There is no way around that. And then in terms of life cycle, so we said minimum of 8 years. As I said, you would probably expect to repaint every 10 to 15 years if you don't maintain the oiling of the surface, because the oil breaks down by UV light, but you don't get rotting timber. So you preserve all that embodied energy that is already in the building anyway. And then another really important point is end of life. So all that happens is that the oil breaks down by UV light, and you're left with that powder pigment, which is mostly a raw earth pigment. Now, we've had a look at perhaps going down the route of getting getting accreditation from cradle to cradle, but that seems a very expensive route and a good greenwashing way for certain big brands to probably start promoting things that might not be quite true. So we haven't quite done that yet. We'll keep an eye on that. But these are essentially the ingredients, the maintenance, and the reason to use it. So we'll see if we'll save that for later. I'll stop my screen share and then hand back to Steph.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Michiel. That's really interesting. And yeah, I'm not kind of really good introduction for me into Linseed Paints because I'm not completely, I don't think I've used them before actually, but very, very good sales pitch because I mean, they sound brilliant. And yeah, and there's been quite a few questions in the chat box for you as well. So we'll come back to those at the end. Thank you. On to another finish. We've got Claire Whitney from Clayworks. Hand over to you, Claire. Thanks for screen sharing already. Good job.
Just remember to unmute myself. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. And I'm just going to do a sort of real rapid fire what, why, where of clay plasters. Can everybody see the screen? Is that okay? Yeah,
yeah, looks great.
Yeah. Okay. So clay plasters. What are clay plasters? They are a wall finish, an interior wall finish. Okay. Now the screen is not moving. There we go. They're an interior wall finish, and they're very simply just sort of sand and clay, and just made up of natural mineral materials. And they've been used in architecture for about 9,000 years. And they are now used for interiors to replace sort of gypsum and paint, or limestone or lime finishes, and all sorts of interior finishes. So very simple, and most of them don't include any polymers. They've traditionally been dug up all over the world and mixed locally and applied to the interiors of buildings all over the world. The founders of our company started off doing this, and back in around 2000, that the only way to sort of make clay plasters was to dig them up locally and apply them on the buildings locally. And if anybody wants to do that, which is the purest way of making clay plasters, then plenty of YouTube videos, there's books, our founders have written books, there's loads of ways of making clay plasters. And as you can see, it's pretty hard work to make clay plasters. So I think that in the last 20 years, we've moved on a long way, and now clay plasters are more readily available to people. And the back-breaking work has been taken out of it, and you can either buy it sort of wet. You can buy clay plasters like this that are readily mixed, wet, ready to go on the walls, or you can buy them dry like this. So all of the hard work has been done. All of the materials have been sourced, mixed. The pigments have been put into the clay plasters. So this is simply, it's an example of a readily available clay plaster that simply needs to be mixed with water and put on the walls. So clay plasters are now available to everybody, whether you're in a high-rise building in London or New York, or in a very rural location in a sort of self-build. They're also very sort of straightforward to apply. Traditional plastering skills, traditional plastering tools, there's no mystery. There are quite a lot of sort of nuances around timings and details. So somebody with a little bit of experience with clay is generally going to get a more sort of consistent and better result. But there are lots of people who take it on themselves and do a great job. So really sort of accessible and available. And also there's no sort of great mystery to applying them. They can go straight onto gypsum in many cases, but they can also go onto pretty much any substrate. So not wood, not metal, but pretty much any substrate. There may be a backing coat that is required. Sometimes there's a clay backing coat, sometimes there's mesh, but clay can go onto wood panels, wood fiber panels, straw, obviously, blocks, bricks, all of those sorts of things. So really sort of straightforward now. So some clays, there are a lot of clay plasters now readily available around the world. Some are just made from earth colors, so literally using the natural colors of the earth. Others have natural pigments. So there's a really wide variety of colors, and traditionally associated with sort of earth colors, but now we can get clay plasters to pretty much any sort of color now. So a really good alternative to paints now. So why would you use a clay plaster? Well, firstly, it's beautiful. It has a very, very unique aesthetic. And you can see here that with a clay plaster, it's very sort of porous. It's got that suedey look, that sort of cloudy look. It's never going to be perfectly homogeneous like a paint, but it has this natural look that's created because the materials in it are not processed, so they're not homogeneous. But you also get the difference with clay to say paint or even lime, gypsum, is that it's mixed up from these raw ingredients. When it goes on the wall, it doesn't cure when it goes hard. It simply releases its water. So it remains a raw material. It's not fired, it's not cured, it hasn't gone through a geochemical change of state. So that is just simply raw earth that you see there. And so it's the unique aesthetic that people sort of crave with clay plasters. It's very soft, very sort of absorbent, and it absorbs light, and it's also architecturally versatile. It goes around all sorts of corners, great for detailing, and there are all sorts of other things you can do with it. You can carve it, you can shape it, and you can create sort of 3D effects with it. It's regarded as a very traditional material, sort of 9,000 years old, but it's actually now a very modern material. Clay plasters have been used throughout the Museum of the Future in Dubai, sort of regarded as the most futuristic building of the world. So it's great to see that this sort of traditional material is becoming the material of the future. So another reason why is health. Clay plasters are natural. As I said, they're just simple materials. And in most common materials, you probably, well, we know that there are about 85,000 chemicals in common building materials. Simon's alluded to sort of the VOCs in paints. We know that those are common in most building materials, and we know that a lot of these VOCs and other chemicals are chemicals of concern, that public health authorities around the world are now suggesting that we try and avoid, because of both sort of short-term and long-term chronic health problems associated with those VOCs. So clay plasters will generally not contain any of those chemicals. Buyer beware. There are lots of different clay plasters around the world. Some do have some ingredients added, and some don't. So just look for sort of transparency and declarations of the ingredients in the clay plasters before you buy. So the other reason clay plasters are really healthy is that they absorb water and they absorb moisture. This comes back to that sort of that porosity that I was talking about. So they will be they take in water all the time and then release it back into the air. Breathability, moisture buffering, hygroscopic are the terms that you probably heard. And clay plasters are sort of relatively higher breathable, more breathable than other materials. And you can see here that they compare really well to many other sort of finishes and interior construction materials in terms of their moisture absorption ability. Only sort of longitudinal wood is probably better. So clay is helping to keep that indoor humidity at between 40 and 60%, which has huge health benefits. It helps to prevent asthma. It helps to prevent virus and bacteria surviving. And it will also sort of prevent dust mites, which are the cause of many asthmas, surviving. So very breathable. It has many other performance benefits. It helps sort of control the thermal comfort of a building. There's a lot of data on that. There's a lot more to learn. Very complex, and I think we're just at the beginning of learning about clay plaster in thermal comfort. We do know that a clay plaster has fantastic acoustic absorption abilities. There's quite a lot of data to back that up. And consequently, it's great for sort of public buildings, restaurants, and theatres, music halls, that sort of thing. So clay plaster, like I think all natural materials, and certainly those we're talking about tonight, will help to improve indoor air quality and reduce those VOCs. And we know that that definitely affects in mental health and cognitive function by a huge amount. So clay's great because it's very soft on the senses as well as those physical health benefits. Clay is also, a second why is it's very, very low embodied carbon. So there is carbon involved, emitted with the extraction of the raw materials, but bear in mind they don't need quarrying, blasting, or anything like that. The manufacturing process is really sort of straightforward. There's generally no heat, no water, no additives, so consequently no runoff, no pollution, no waste, anything like that. It's purely the blending of raw materials, and there should be a very, very simple process with absolutely no waste and no pollution. And all of those materials are then installed in the building. And at the end of life, in theory, they are disposable on site. So no landfill and zero waste. In practicality, possibly a little difficult if it's on a non-compostable backing board, but if it's on straw or one of the sort of new compostable backing boards, the whole thing could be disposed of back on site. So as a result of that lack of processing, a very sort of simple process, it does mean that there's a lot less embodied carbon in a clay plaster buildup that compared to, say, a gypsum and paint. And there's a lot of variables in here. It's not an exact science, but there have been calculations done by people like the Materials Council who have calculated that by using a clay plaster, you can save up to 2.4 kilograms of carbon per meter squared compared to a gypsum and paint buildup. John Butler of the Sustainable Building Consultancy has compared the embodied carbon of clay plaster to several other commonly used interior materials, and you can see here that the embodied carbon is kind of pretty negligible compared to other materials. So that's the kind of the what and the why. The where, it's an interior material, walls, ceilings, not walls, sorry, not floors. It can be used for fixed furniture. It's great in bathrooms, great in kitchens. Clay does not like to be knocked around. It does need to be sort of treated with respect and left to do what it does really well, which is absorb moisture and toxins. But it doesn't like running water, splashes, being knocked around or anything like that. It does absorb odors, so really, really good in kitchens and those sorts of environments. So what we recommend generally is if you're looking for a material for a water resistant finish, then you use a Tadlact, and a Tadlact is not a clay plaster. Something I was just sort of asked to mention tonight, but a Tadlact is a lime-based plaster, and it is water resistant. It's originally from Morocco, and it's a very particular sort of lime from Morocco and a very particular processing sort of way of doing things in Morocco that you come up with this lime material. It looks different to clay because it does set, so it has that harder sort of surface. It does mean that it's washable, water repellent. So it's a really good sort of alternative to clay where you're looking for that water resistant finish. And that's kind of readily available, and again in a dry powder form It does take quite a lot of skill to apply. It's a little bit more time consuming than clay, but it does make for a great alternative. So that's me. Hopefully I've sort of come in on my 5 minutes, but if anybody's got any questions, please do feel free to give me a shout.
Brilliant, thank you, Claire. You definitely get the award for putting the most information on natural materials into a 10-minute presentation. That was really informative, thank you. And also, as Claire always presents beautiful images of clay plasters. So yeah, thank you very much. We're going to go to Rachel Fowler now from Rachel and Fowler Interiors, who will be talking about natural wallpapers. So can I hand over to Rachel?
Hi everybody. My technology is not seeming to click on, unfortunately, tonight, so I'm just going to run through it. So everybody knows what wallpapers are. They've been around for centuries. Wallpaper started back in, was rice paper years and years ago, and yes, there are lots of material wallpapers on the market. The one in particular that I have designed, it took 2 years to get to market, all funded by myself, is a non-woven wallpaper. So there's the traditional non-woven wallpaper, which came out in the early 2000s, and this was then joined last year in 2021 by an eco-friendly biodegradable wallpaper of non-woven. So what's the difference? So if you look at most wallpaper stockists that say non-woven, they'll say it's sustainable, it's FSC certified. But when you dig back deeper, and then with the collaboration I've done with the company that prints my wallpapers, they actually contains polyethylene terephthalate, I hope I got that right, which is a synthetic fiber plastic. So the old non-woven wallpaper, especially the commercial world for interiors, for hotels, they love it because you can paste the wall, put it on, and basically you can wash it and wipe it with a damp sponge. So with this new non-woven, eco-friendly, biodegradable wallpaper, it's all made from natural pulp. It does contain pigments. It has a positive life cycle in the sense that how it's made, and its end of life, it is biodegradable. But however, this can be altered depending on the kind of paste that is used on the wall. So I always recommend Oro, which is a German company. They make a natural paste, or there's Earthborn in the UK. Or if you're doing this for yourself or for a friend or recommend for a client, you can also make your own wallpaper paste, which is quite fun. And then so basically it comes off the wall and it's biodegradable, can go in the earth. So I have had some stockists say to me, is this biodegradable? Does it mean it starts biodegrading on the walls? No, it doesn't. A lot of research and time. The paper is actually made in Germany, and it has took quite a lot of time and testing for that. My wallpaper line is manufactured by Surface Print. Before I get into them, the UK is one of the biggest biggest manufacturers or printers of wallpaper in the world. A lot of people come to the UK for their wallpapers to be printed. Now, the company I use, Surface Print, they use 100% recycled energy for printing of their wallpapers. When I initially first went to them, I liked the non-woven, and he just said, I have to say it's got PET in it. So, and I thought, I can't use this because it's not my USP, it's not sustainable, it's got plastic in, I don't want to know. So anyway, they finally, this one came in like October last year. It is different to the normal standard non-woven wallpaper that a lot of people will stack on their stockists, interior stockists, etc. If you look at a normal non-woven piece of wallpaper, it has like a smooth, glossy-ish kind of effect. But if you look at this new eco biodegradable brand, it reminds you of traditional wallpaper like 30 or 40 years ago. It has that old traditional feel. When I first saw this, and we did our test run at the end of last year, I was just like, oh, this seems, how is the industry going to take this? And I did a survey, I went around friends' places and contacted colleagues, and they really liked it. So it's a great product. Its life cycle has got a good life cycle. the only issue with it is that we're waiting for somebody to come up with wrapping for wallpaper that is not plastic. Unfortunately, the wallpaper is covered in plastic. When I ship out, all the products that I ship out, except for the cover and the wallpaper, it is completely used recyclable or biodegradable materials. Everything my ethos is around that. And another issue when it comes to wallpapers are the pigments, not the pigments, the inks for printing. People seem to think that all wallpaper ink is water-based. However, there are probably some companies out there that still use other types of inks which can contain chemicals. Yeah, so that's pretty much. I'm pretty impressed with the wallpaper. It's took 2 years to get to market. I've done this completely on my own. If you're interested and you're in Scotland, Brick Interiors have just launched their new studio, which I'm featured in. It's featured in Singapore. I've managed to get in a stockist there, and I'm in London in Edge Eco Design, if anyone's from there, and other stockists. So yeah, it's been a great time. And if you want to learn more, last year, whilst designing this wallpaper, I actually wrote a book called My Happy Place, which the link is in the thing for Waterstones to Amazon. And this is basically 7 chapters on wall coverings, floor coverings, furniture. This is my book. And yeah, so that coincided with the release of the wallpaper. My wallpaper went live in April this year. And yeah, it's not certified circle to circle, as Michiel pointed out. It's quite an expensive thing. As a new entrepreneur releasing a product to market, getting these standards is quite a hefty charge. So hopefully that will come later on. So yeah, and my basis for my designs, unfortunately you can't see at the moment because my tech wouldn't coordinate with the guys tonight. It's to do with nature. It's back to nature. It has I love Asia, but it's back to nature with flowers, peacocks, bamboo. I've added a funk to it. The image that they put on for the advertising this, because I have quite a humorous personality. I like to have a bit of a laugh. So I've done leopards with pink champagne, which is actually one of the favorite ones at the moment. And there's other varying designs. Some are bold colors, some are light colors, because not everybody likes striking deers. For cleaning it, so for a normal non-woven wallpaper, it's a sponge and damp. For this wallpaper, you have to use it like your for fabric wallpaper, so you have to vacuum it lightly. Now, are there any other wallpapers on the market that are this unique? Yes, there's Glamora in Italy called Glampure. They have a natural wallpaper, and currently I'm unaware of anybody else that's offering it at the moment. But when you're looking at wallpaper, always look to see if it might be non-woven, might be FSC certified, but actually at the end of the day, does it contain any other elements like the PET, which is the plastic? And I think that's me. Sorry about there's no images for everybody, but if you check out my website or my social media account. So yeah. Oh, how long is it? Oh, that's a plaster. Sorry.
That's great. Thank you very much, Rachel. And yeah, Rachel's website is brilliant, so please do check it out if you've got time. So we're going to move to Q&A. There have been a few kind of consistent themes that have come through. So we'll start with one about specialist trade people and skilled contractors. Do you need kind of specialists to apply these natural materials? So I don't know if you want to start first, Michiel.
No, you don't, is the very short answer. You just need somebody who's actually interested in applying it. So one of the things that we come across a lot is there is a big chunk of decorators out there who want to just do a quick job. It is literally just a bit of loose paint flaking, just get that off, slap the new paint on, and they want to be off. Well, that is not how you apply linseed paint. So, and this actually combines with one of the other questions that I've seen, where the question was, do you need to remove all the existing paint? If it's plastic paint, yes, because the linseed paint can only work as well as the surface it goes onto. So if it goes onto a flaking, peeling substrate, linseed paint can't do any better than that. So the best thing to do is just get all the plastic paints off, then painted in linseed paint in really thin coats. Wants to have 3 thin coats, and if you do 3 thin coats, yeah, you're absolutely fine.
Brilliant. Claire and Rachel, did you want to answer that one as well?
Yeah, I'll just say something about that. I agree with everything that you just said, that the material is only as good as the surface that it goes on. So proper surface preparation. Clay's not going to work on something that's moving, that's wet, that's not properly prepared. Yeah, proper surface preparation. In terms of skilled labor, we get asked this all the time. Do you need a skilled applicator? Certainly for more sort of ambitious and artisan finishes of clay, you definitely do. For a sort of what we call one of our classic finishes, then we always recommend using an experienced clay plasterer, because there are certain nuances with regard to timings and details. It's really easy to get it wrong, and as you said, there's people trying to take shortcuts with the preparation and the building, and an experienced clay plasterer will be really meticulous about the surface that they prepare it on, and will know all about the timings and the details, so they get it right first time and get it done quickly. Having said that, we hear all the time about sort of DIYers and really good plasterers that do take on clay plaster, and most of the time they have spectacular results. So so it's a growing trade.
Brilliant. Rachel, did you have anything to add?
Well, wallpaper. If you asked me to wallpaper, I'd be like, no, I think I'll pass on that one. So I think it's down to, you can try it, but if it goes wrong, it's like anything, it could be an expensive redo. So obviously with applying wallpaper to wall, obviously the surface underneath it needs to be smooth. So obviously of the lumps of any lumps and bumps, and also applying the wallpaper to damp walls not going to work either.
And just following on from that, there've been a lot of questions about using these materials externally. Should we go in the same? Michelle, do you want to talk about?
It originally was used for interiors, exteriors, anything that needed painting in timber and metal, and you can see that most buildings certainly the older buildings in Scandinavia, they will still be painted in linseed oil paint. It's exceptionally durable. Yeah.
Very good. Claire?
Sorry, I was just typing an answer there. With the questions on lifespan.
No, it's about can you use clay plaster externally?
No, that's simple. No. No, clay doesn't like water, so it is an interior product.
Yeah.
So walls and ceilings and fixed furniture interior is its limitations. Yeah.
And I will make the assumption, Rachel, that wallpaper is not an external.
No, it could look a bit of a disaster.
Yeah. Question for Simon. We kind of honed a movement against plastics in natural finishes, to put it kind of in a more general sense. And I was wondering if there was sort of a policy action coming to remove plastics from, and particularly in the context of sort of greenwashing that you mentioned. Do you think there's a kind of awareness or labelling or anything that will differentiate natural materials in that context?
Well, when the guys from Switzerland introduced this report, we were joined on our webinar by the British Coatings Federation. And the British Coatings Federation represent most of the mainstream paint manufacturers in the UK. And they were spitting blood, I think it's fair to say, about this report. They were absolutely kiboshing it, saying that the research was not peer-reviewed, and they've been so upset by it. They've written several papers, which I'm happy to share with you, refuting that report, because well, for obvious reasons, really. So there's no doubt about it that you know, there is plastic in most paints. You won't find plastics in in clay plasters. You won't find plastics in Michiel's linseed oil based paints, but you will find plastics in most, you know, emulsions. I think there is a messaging issue. I don't think people really realize that. I mean, when people go and buy a can of paint, it's more about the color and the aesthetic, isn't it? You know, and that's about as far as the average, even enlightened consumer, you know, might go to. So yes, there's lots of work to do, I think, to spread the word, to make people more aware of the issues around plastics. And of course, we don't know all the issues around plastics at the minute. We don't know all the issues around its manufacture and also what happens when it breaks down. There's still so much learning to do. But yeah, there's lots of work to do when it comes to messaging. So yeah.
Sorry, can I just quickly add on to that? Because that is certainly in the CPD presentations that I give, it's the main thing that I try to convey as well, that we need to start looking at paint again as not just a shade that you change every season. It is a building product. It needs to become part of the structure of the building. If you start with the right ingredients and the right production method, the color palette is automatically correct as well, because you're not trying to imitate certain colors using all kinds of chemical colorants. And it's a completely different approach. And yeah, we just need to go back to actually looking at it as a sacrificial coat, which needs to be natural if we can keep it natural. Sorry. Elaborate on that.
No, that's great. It's much more interesting when everyone talks to each other. So I think we are all at ACAN always trying to connect the dots between building materials and people who use them, people who specify them, and the kind of industry itself. So it's really nice to sort of have these conversations more collaboratively. We at Natural Materials, and particularly within ACAN, like to look at biodiversity, which is often something that gets a bit lost in construction. We very heavily focus on carbon, but biodiversity is critical. And there was a question, no, sorry, back to you, Michiel. Another question about the flax plant and whether it could be, it's just grown for linseed oil, or if it can be used for something else. Is oil a byproduct, and are there other industries that can benefit from that kind of natural material integration?
Yeah, well, essentially the oil was historically always a bit of a byproduct, because that's just a grinding of the flax seed. Most of the plant was used for linen. That's kind of where it all goes into. So it's to make fabrics. So it's one of these plants that you can use essentially every part of it. Yeah.
Cool. So we've got a couple more questions before we wrap up. In terms of lifespan, there's been a few sort of general questions about how, and we get this particularly in the kind of natural materials conversation, how long these materials last. Plastic-based materials are obviously proposed to last indefinitely, which we know is not true, and particularly in terms of circular economy and a natural circular economy is a fallacy. But how long in terms of durability would you say these materials last? Do you want to go first, Rachel?
Oh, yes, I'll be able to start here listening to everybody else. Can I just add something to the paint?
Yeah, please.
I did the New School College, University in New York last year. And when they're saying about it's the colour, I think it's trying to change people's attitude, not just to the fact it's natural, but also what the normal paints are actually doing to your health and well-being. Because people, it's not just the VOCs, you could touch it, children touch the walls, they absorb it, it's about absorption and digestion. So I just, yeah, when I'm speaking to clients, I'm highly going on about the fact, the health aspects of what the products that they're thinking of purchasing. That's just, anyway. So the lifespan of wallpaper, well, like this wallpaper is, as I say, a natural product, and it's like fabric. So I wouldn't recommend it in areas where you've got a little one on a tricycle banging into the walls all the time, because the lifespan's going to last probably about 6 months. But generally, for a wallpaper can be on a wall for years. I mean, look at some of the old houses around the UK, around the world. As long as it's, you know, it's not treated badly or drawn on or wrecked or spoilt, it can last as long as you want it to last.
Brilliant, thanks. Claire?
So the founders of Clayworks used to work with cob buildings and restoring cob buildings, and they would frequently find buildings where the clay was still there after 200 years. It was known to have been there for 200 years. So we do know that you know, traditional clay plasters will last for centuries. In terms of the modern clay plasters, then obviously we're still sort of waiting to see. There's no reason to believe that they shouldn't last for as long as the fabric of the building. So assuming that the fabric of the building is sound, not moving too much, it's not subject to sort of bashing around or water, flooding, anything like that, then we would hope certainly that it would last the 60 years that we hope buildings last, but hopefully many more years than that. I'll let you know in 100 years time.
Thanks. Michiel?
As long as it essentially goes on the bare substrate. So if we take timber as the main substrate that it would go, or the main surface it would be painted on, and the oil and the pigments combined can actually really penetrate into the surface of the timber, the durability is exceptionally long. You're talking, and we found, you know, traces of linseed oil paints going back hundreds of years. A big shift has been obviously towards far healthier pigments. We don't quite know yet what the durability is going to be of zinc white and titanium white in combination in replacement of lead. Obviously, it's, you know, infinitely healthier, but you know, we're still talking decades. It will very much depend on the exposure to the elements. How much sunlight does it get? How much? If you have a combination of a lot of sunlight and a lot of wind and rain, that combination over time is going to erode the paint off. But we're talking years. Yeah.
I think that comes back to a kind of common theme that we get through our natural materials, is that it's about caring and maintaining them in a kind of consistent way, and not treating things kind of throwaway culture. It's much more about, you know, holistic living. I think thank you very much for all the questions. They've been really interesting, and I'm sorry to everybody who didn't manage to get your questions answered. We do send out a party bag at the end of the event, so we will try and answer those unanswered questions within that. So I'm going to bring the event to a close. Thank you everyone for coming. It's been really, really brilliant, and I hope you found that interesting and informative and useful. I just wanted to ask our speakers just to end on a kind of take what they would say for their kind of, I've sprung this on you, so I apologise. Your kind of take home for considering natural finishes in your kind of environment and in your home, and if you're an architect in the buildings that you're specifying. What would you like the audience to take away in a kind of couple of sentences? So if you go start with Simon.
Yeah, I suppose in my experience, you know, natural finishes, they smell great. I mean, they just remind you of where they come from, which is nature, and that, you know, they just, so as opposed to your average, you know, sort of finish which sounds horrible, then you know, these are a real pleasure to work with and to apply, and usually quite forgiving as well. So yeah, there's no real downside.
That's a brilliant one. I think the smell, we haven't had that for a while, so it's really good to be reminded, particularly when we're all sitting on Zoom. So it's nice to have the kind of other senses brought in. Thank you. Michiel?
I think it follows on from what you were saying. I think it needs to be just part of a holistic approach. You know, we're still very much thinking in individual compartments. We use one product for one thing for another thing, and if we just think about the holistic building and what it does to our not just physical health but also mental health, it's the use of natural materials makes perfect sense. Yeah,
couldn't agree more. Claire?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, agree with all of that. I think The thing about natural materials is we have to change the mindset. We've got used to, over the last sort of 100, 200 years, to using other materials and having faith in them. But actually these natural materials are proven. They're proven over centuries, and they are beautiful and accessible, easy to use, and they're there, and they have so many benefits, not only for the benefit of the planet, but also for our own health, and also for the health of the building, the fabric of the building.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Rachel, to wrap up?
My natural materials, life is about living, and living is about well-being. So it's bringing the outside back into our living environments to promote both our mental and physical well-being. And what a better way to do it with natural materials.
Brilliant. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you very much, everybody. And a big thank you to all of our speakers for this evening and for giving up their time and educating us about their specific kind of interests and professions. So thank you, all of you. Really appreciated it.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks. We're having a break in August, but we're back in September, as I said. So we'll see you all then. Thank you.